Hello, fifth grade, and welcome to Studio 37. This lecture is going to be about three different classical art movements. Because over the course of this unit of study, I want us to be able to distinguish between classical art and modern art. Now, classical art, as I've told many of you in class, generally pertains to three major themes. These themes are religious narratives, Greek and Roman allegory or Greek and Roman mythology, and portraits of very important people or the kings and queens of their time. So as we look at all this artwork, you're going to see these three themes emerge over and over and over again because the most talented artists really only painted those three things, which granted they are some remarkable works of art that are stellar and beautiful and amazing in the true sense of the word, awe-inspiring. However, it is rather boring to continually deal with the same subject matter. In my video slideshow, we will be viewing work from the Renaissance time period, as well as the Baroque time period, and Jacques-Louis David, who was a French neoclassical artist. This will give us a base foundation of what came before realism, impressionism, post-impressionism, and modern art as we know it. I hope you enjoy these films and find them enlightening, and please remember you are to write one paragraph about your favorite art movement discussed, whether it's a classical or a modern art movement, and you're also, for extra credit, I need you to make a Venn diagram. Feel free to get your parents involved in all the fun. They share these videos with them, and you have free will to have them help you write as well. Thank you for your time and attention, and I hope you enjoy my slideshow. As promised, we're going to examine three classical art movements in order to compare them and contrast them with the modern art movements that are coming down the road. The first classical art movement we are going to examine is the Renaissance. The Renaissance took place largely in Italy in the 1500s. There were some phenomenal artists, and some of the most famous works of art in the world were created during the Renaissance. So the things I'm about to discuss, many of you should already be familiar with. There are the three major themes of classical art that I want to reiterate over and over again because we will see them in all three of these art movements. That is religious narratives or Bible stories, Greek and Roman allegory or Greek and Roman mythology, and portraits. And generally speaking, portraits were only of the most famous people. The Mona Lisa is quite the exception. The Renaissance is a time when the artists, the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles are named for it, were busy making art. Like I said earlier, it was majority of it taking place in Italy. And since most people couldn't read at the time, the Catholic Church relied heavily on Renaissance artists to spread the message of the Gospels. And that's something we're going to see with the Sistine Chapel ceiling and the Last Judgment, as well as the Pietà and David. And artists thought very mathematically at this time, and they developed both the golden mean, or the perfect proportion, and linear perspective, which is a mathematical and systematic approach to drawing in order to accurately portray space. And I will be showing you examples of that as well. So most of you probably heard of Leonardo da Vinci. He's most famous for probably the Mona Lisa. That's probably the most famous painting he's done. He was also an architect, an engineer, a poet, a playwright, a musician, and a battle advisor. The Mona Lisa, of course, he worked on for 17 years, and it moved with him 3 times. Over the process of painting the Mona Lisa, he was dissecting cadavers in order to understand facial structures. Now, the painting on the right is El Salvador del Mundo, or the Savior of the World. This was painted by Leonardo da Vinci, and I included this because of the only 20 known existing works by Leonardo da Vinci, this is the only one in a private collection. It's not in a museum. And it sold last year for $450 million, making it the most valuable work of art in the world. Another famous work by Leonardo da Vinci is The Last Supper. The Last Supper depicts Jesus having his last meal before he was crucified the next day, before being betrayed in the garden by Judas Iscariot. And there's lots of symbolism in this. But one thing I want you guys to notice is the linear perspective. If you pay attention to all the lines running perpendicular or No, excuse me. All the lines running parallel to the floor, they all create a trajectory that goes right towards Jesus' face. This is linear perspective. All the lines in the ceiling, all of them. And if you want a more accurate vision of this, check it out. That is what linear perspective means. It means systematically drawing things to accurately portray space, and this was developed during the Renaissance. I'm going to show you another example of this when we examine the work of Raphael. The next artist I want to talk about is Michelangelo. Michelangelo is probably most famous for his sculptures, both the Pietà and David. An interesting thing about the Pietà, he was so young when he carved it that nobody believed he could have possibly done it. So he actually broke into the Vatican and carved his name. And one thing I learned recently about the David in researching for these discussions is that it was actually carved to be placed on top of a church. So his head and his hands are oversized. However, once it was complete, they could not figure out a way to get it on top of the church, so it is now in a museum. This, of course, is the Sistine Chapel ceiling, painted by the sculptor Michelangelo. One thing I very recently learned about this painting is I knew that Michelangelo didn't want to do it. I know that it damaged his eyesight terribly because he laid on his back for 4 years while he worked on it. But I didn't know that he was set up by Raphael to fail. Raphael highly suggested Michelangelo paint the Sistine Chapel ceiling, knowing that Michelangelo was a sculptor, not a painter. However, Michelangelo accepted the challenge, and now it remains one of the most famous works of art in the world. Of course, the Sistine Chapel ceiling depicts the very beginning of the Bible all the way to the altar place. Behind the painting behind the altar is the Last Judgment, which depicts the end of time. So it goes from the beginning of time with the creation of man, or the creation of Adam, if you notice on your right, all the way to the end of time with the Last Judgment. Probably one of the most remarkable paintings in the world, and somewhere I can't wait to go see. Raphael, as I said, set up Michelangelo to fail. He was a painter. He also painted a lot for the church. As I said, the church used Renaissance artists over and over and over again to help tell the illiterate masses, or the people that couldn't read, about the story of Jesus. So this painting is a little bit of an exception to that. Even though this painting is in the Pope's house, in the Pope's library, all the people in this painting are Greek and Roman philosophers. And you can see Apollo in the archway on the left, as well as Athena, the goddess of wisdom, on the right. And that is Socrates and Plato in the center. Plato is the one poking up to the sky. And one interesting thing I like about this painting is Raphael included himself as a famous artist philosopher, mingling with the greatest minds of antiquity, or of Greek and Roman times. And the last of the Renaissance artists, or the last of the Ninja Turtles, is Donatello. I do not know much about Donatello outside of the fact he was a sculptor, and he sculpted both in marble, and he did castings in bronze. I hope you enjoyed this bit about the Renaissance. My art teacher did teach me a song to help me remember these things, and it goes a little like this. Leonardo da Vinci's Mona Lisa, Michelangelo's Pietà and David, Leonardo da Vinci's Last Supper, and the ceilings Michelangelo did. The Renaissance. Well, I hope you enjoyed the first part of my classical art series.